The following is a real-time process of computerized pattern making when given only a specification sheet and a sketch to work from. By simply starting with one rectangle, I will be able to make the entire garment to spec in under 40 minutes using the powerful and intuitive tools in TukaText TukaDesign application. Let's begin. We first begin by setting up our working units in inches. The first thing we're going to do to make our pattern block for the shirt is make a rectangle. So we're going to create a new file and we're going to take our dimensions for the back by looking at our spec sheet. If we take a look at the spec sheet, we can see here that we are given a center back length of 26.5 inches and also a back neck drop of 3/4 of an inch. So my X dimension for the total back length will be 27.25 inches. Now to find the width of our block, we're going to look at the chest measurement. We see it's 44 inches. So if we divide this by 4, so we're going to have 4 panels, 2 in the front and 2 in the back, we're going to type in 11 inches. And we click OK, and our block has been created. By pressing the F8 key, we can quickly see our dimensions. The next step will be adding reference points. So I'm going to grab my point on tool and I'm going to add a point for my center back neck drop. So here I'm typing in 3/4 of an inch from the previous point, and my point has been added. The next reference point will be for the neck opening. If we look at our spec sheet, we see that the neck opening is requiring 6.5 inches from high point shoulder to high point shoulder. So we're going to divide this by 2. So I'm going to add a point 3.25 inches from my next point. Click OK. The point has been added. Now we need to add a point for across the shoulder measurement. So shoulder to shoulder is showing at 18 inches. And we're working on a half pattern, so I will add a point from center back neck at 9 inches away from the next point. We click OK, and our point has been added. Next, we'll look at our spec sheet and take a look at the armhole measurement, which is 20 inches. So I'm going to add a point along the side at about 11 inches from high point shoulder. This is an approximate value until we can define the armhole shape. By using the Move Point tool, I can now begin to define my shape of the neck by moving the point and changing the attributes. First I'm going to move the point and change this to a curve point attribute. And I'll move this point into position and click on the line to add a point until I get the shape that I like. In the armhole section, I will do the same thing. I will first move my point and change the attribute to a curve point. Now I can move my point to get a better shape of the armhole. And then I will move my shoulder slope. And if we look at the spec sheet, we are not given a shoulder slope dimension, so we'll drop the shoulder 1.5 inches, which is a normal shoulder slope amount for this shirt. Now that I moved the shoulder slope, I can go back to my armhole and reshape it by adding points and moving points. And we can see our dimension is about 10.6 inches. And we look at the spec sheet, our total armhole is calling for 20 inches. So if I measure my back armhole length, I can see that the segment length is currently 10.6. So I'm going to change this value to be 9 7/8 of an inch. And then later we'll put the 11 1/8 inch into the front armhole. So here I'm making this adjustment at the first point horizontally. I click OK, and my segment length has been adjusted. Next, we're going to define the waistline placement. So we look at our spec sheet and we see our waistline is going to be a specific distance from high point shoulder. So what I'm going to do is set a guideline at high point shoulder and then offset this 16.5 inches down. And then I can add my reference point onto the pattern, and my line has been placed. My waistline has been defined. Now if I look at the sweep, I see that the measurement's 48, so I'm going to need to raise the point at the sweep 1 inch. So I put 0 in the X, 1 inch in the Y, and click OK. Now for the tail height, our spec sheet does not have a dimension for this. So again, we're going to assume a default of 1.5 inches. Again, I will use my move point tool and add a few curve points to get the shape that I want at the bottom hem. So I add and move my points to get a nice smooth shape, and our style line has been defined. Now I'm going to do also the same on the side seam as well. I'll remove my guideline and change the point attribute to a curve, and I can take the move point tool and shape up the side seam. Now that I'm satisfied with the shape of the back, I'm going to make a copy and paste, and I'm going to make the front piece out of the back piece. So I made an exact copy of my back piece. So we'll double click inside the piece and name the piece front. The first modification I will do to the front is lower the neck drop. So I'm going to use my move proportional tool, and I'm going to lower the center back or the center front point, and if we look at the spec sheet, the front neck drop is calling for 2 3/4 of an inch. So I'm going to move in the X 2 inches because I already had 3/4 of an inch, and now I'm going to reshape the curve of my front neck by clicking on each point with the move point tool and define my shape of the neck. Next thing I'm going to do is take the front piece and stack it at the shoulder on top of the back. Then I can take my flip along tool and flip the front piece along the shoulder line. And then I can zoom in on my neckline to see what my front and back neckline look like joined together. And if I need to make any further modifications, I go back to my move point tool and reshape my front and back neckline until I'm satisfied with the look. Now I'm going to separate my front and back, and I'm going to take the measuring tool, and again I will measure my front armhole. By clicking the segment length edit, I can then change this to be 10 1/8 of an inch, and I'm going to make the adjustment along the curve because my shoulder point and chest point have been defined. So now I change the measurement along the curve proportionally. Again, I can stack it and flip, and then I'll zoom in to get a look at my armhole, front and back together. Now I'm going to go to the segment menu and open up my compare length window. The purpose of this window is to add my segments together. So what I'm going to do is select my back armhole and hit the plus button to get the measurement and the front armhole, and I add the two together, and you can see in the total plus column I got a value of 20 inches. And if we look at our spec sheet, the armhole is showing 20. So we have a perfect measurement for both front and back armhole of 20 inches. The next pattern modification requires me to join the front and the back at the shoulder again, and I need to extend my back shoulder by an amount of 1.5 inches. So if we go to the segment menu and go to cut parallel, you can see if we look at the sketch that there's an extension. The back shoulder is coming over the front. So in the distance field I'm going to cut my block 1.5 inches, and if we separate the pieces, I now have that 1.5 inch piece which needs to be joined onto the back piece. So what I do is I take the join piece tool and I join the two pieces together, and the extension has now been added onto my back at the shoulder. Now I need to insert notches, so let's zoom in on the front and pick up the notch tool, and we can add notches at the points where we joined the extension. Now we will look at our spec sheet and look at the dimension for the back yoke height. It's 2 3/4 inches. To create this, I'm going to drag out a guideline and place it on my center back neck, and I'm going to offset this 2 3/4 inches from center back neck. Now I can take my cutting tool and simply cut from point to point, and I'm going to cancel my seam. We'll put the seams in last, and now my yoke piece has been created. I can drag away the guideline and move my piece, and I'm going to realign the grain, make it parallel to the segment, and then rotate the piece. And now I'll set this piece as a half, so I select my 2 points and I click the set half, because this is a mirrored piece or symmetrical piece, so we only need to leave it as a half piece. If we go back and look at the sketch, I can see that the back is actually split into 3 panels. So what I'm going to do is pick up the drafting tool, and I'm going to draft in these style lines, and then we'll split the piece into 3. So here I'm going to specify the distance along the contour from the near point and far point, and I'm going to draft straight across the pattern. Again, I define my point on the contour, and now I'm going to split this segment into 2, and I'm going to divide this up equally between the next segment. So now that my draft lines are in place, I'm going to use the cut along internal tool and cut along each internal line. So I'm splitting the back panel into 3 parts, and now I'll separate my pieces. And then I will set my center back as a half piece along that segment, and we must name each panel piece. So the first piece is going to be the center back panel, and the next one I can call this center back panel 2. So we type in the information, we click apply, and finally I have the side panel. So we name each piece, we click apply, and each piece has been created. Now that each piece has been defined, I will update each piece by hitting replace old. And then I'll bring the front down onto the working area, and we can now create a dart. So again, I'm going to begin by dragging out my guidelines, and from high point shoulder I will put a guideline 9 inches down. Then I'll drag a horizontal guideline and offset this to have my reference lines. Now, before we add our dart points, I'm first going to add support points to my piece so I don't lose any shape of the piece. I need support points along the curve. Now we're going to add the fullness into the armhole. So I'm taking the move proportional tool and I'll add a 1/2 inch of fullness in the X direction. And I can stay in the same tool, zoom in, and true up the shape of the armhole. Clean this up a little bit. Now we're going to put the other 1/2 inch of fullness down here at the sweep. So using the same tool, put a 1/2 inch in the X direction, and I click OK. Now we're ready to add the point. So from the chest point, I'm going to drop this down 2.5 inches, and then my dart width will be 1 inch from that point. So once we have the 2 points defined, I can simply select the 2 points and choose Create Dart tool. Now I need to define the dart depth. So if we look at the spec sheet, the bust dart length is calling for 4 inches. So in the depth field, I type in 4 inches. And I'm going to use a drill hole. It has a diameter of 1/8 of an inch. And the distance from the apex will be a 1/2 inch. Now I need to pivot the dart apex. So in the dart menu, I choose rotate dart around the point, and I position this to my bust point. And now I need to fix the dart to make the dart leg symmetrical. So I'm going to choose the option of making the second dart leg longer. And I click OK. My dart has now been corrected, and I hit enter to go back to the dart attributes. We need to go back and change our depth now, which was 4 inches. So I can change the 4 inches and click OK, and now my dart is in the correct position. So now I can drag my guidelines away, and now I can bring down my side back panel, and we can walk the side seams together. The walk tool will always consider the dart closed. So now I can update my pieces, and we should save the file. So now the next step is to create a placket. So I'm going to bring down the front to the working area, and I'm going to look at my spec sheet and look for the placket width. Front placket width is 1.5 inches. So I'm going to pick up the Move Parallel tool, and I'm going to select my segment, and I'm going to drop down the center front in the Y direction 3/4 of an inch. And from here I'm going to create a parallel line, a distance of 3/4 of an inch, and use the fold out tool to fold this internal segment out. Now I have my fold out facing. Now I can move the internal by selecting the internal, and I'll drop this down 3/4 of an inch for my notch placement. Again, I will update my piece and save the file. Now, again, using the draft tool, we need to put in our draft lines for the front panels, just like we did for the back piece. So I'm going to draft my line, specify the distance on the shoulder, and specify the distance along the bottom hem. I'll move my grain line out of the way, and we'll put a curve point in here. And we can move the point with the move point tool to get our shape. And again, we're going to pick up the cut along internal tool and simply click on the internal line, and my piece has been split. And of course, we have to name our panel. So we give new name to each piece. It's going to be a side front. And now that it's named, I'm going to use the walk tool and add notches. So I pick up my walk tool and I walk up to a point, and I can simply press the F12 key, and this will add a notch to both panels at the same time. You see here. I will also walk my side back panel to the center back panel and put notches there with the F12 key. And the center back panel number 2 to the center back panel number 1. Same thing, pick up the walk tool, go up to a certain point, hit F12, and our notches are created. Okay, now we're going to save the file once again. And the next step will be to take a look at our spec sheet and look at our sleeve measurements. So we can begin by making a block to create our sleeve. So we click the Make Rectangle, and we need to define our length and our width. So if we look at the spec sheet, we can see our measurements here. We can start with a rectangle that is 9 by 9. I'll bring this down onto the working area, and we're going to add our reference points. So I'm going to start with the sleeve cap and put 3.5 inches. Now if we go to the spec sheet and look for the sleeve opening, we have 15.25 inches. So we'll divide that by 2, so we'll add our reference point, take half that amount, and make that 7.625 inches. Click OK to add our point. And now I can simply delete this corner point. And I'll delete this corner point as well. And I'll pick up my move point tool. And we'll now start defining the shape of the armhole. If I put the F8 key, I can quickly see my line measurements and compare to the spec sheet. So once I'm satisfied with the shape, I can then select my 2 points and set it as a half. Now I got my whole sleeve. To make our collar band, what I need to do first is open up this compare length window, and I'm going to take the measurement of the back neck and the front neck. So I'm going to add my 2 segments together, and we can see I've got a total of 8.9 inches. So now when I make my rectangle, we got a length of, say, 9 inches. Then we put in the width of the collar height. And if we look, this will be 1 inch and a quarter. So for the Y dimension, we put 1 inch and a quarter, and we name our piece collar band. Click OK, and bring it down onto the working area. Now to make the shape for the collar band, I'm going to add some reference points in the middle of the segment. So I put a point 50% in the middle of each segment. Then I can take my Move Parallel tool, and I'm going to raise this segment up 1 inch in the y-axis. And then I'm going to take my Add Point tool, and we're going to put in some corner points here. And then I can start rounding off the corner. So I'm going to add some curve points and get a little rounded shape. And I can drop this point back a little bit. I'll take the Move Proportional tool and bring this down. Okay, so my shape is starting to look a lot like a collar band. Now we're going to go to our points and change them into curve points. And you can see here that I have a little bit of a tip there. We want to straighten this out, so I'm just taking my Move Parallel and bring that segment down to straighten it out. And if I want, I can set this angle to be 90 degrees exactly in the corner. So I'm just going in and truing up the shape. Until I'm satisfied with the look. Again, we want to make this angle exactly 90 degrees. And my collar band is created. Finally, I'm going to double check my measurements, and I can see I'm a little bit longer than 9 inches, so I'm simply going to select these 2 points and move them to get my segment length to be exactly 9 inches. And of course we have to mirror this piece, so we select our 2 points and we mirror the collar. Next we're going to make the top collar piece. So I'm going to bring down my back as well as my center front. And we're going to do another length. So let's clear this measurement. So this time we'll select our neck for the back, and this time up to the center line we select in the front neck. So we add those 2 segments and we got a total of 8.18 inches. So we're going to make a rectangle, and then we're going to look for the collar height. We got 1 3/4 of an inch. So that's what we plug into the Y dimension. So we'll just call this the collar fall. And begin to make the piece. So I'm going to clear my working area, leaving only the collar fall piece, and I'll do what I did with the collar band by dividing the piece into 2 equal parts by adding my point 50% in the middle. And I'll take my move point tool and start to define the shape of the color fall. So I'm going to lower this point 1/2 inch, and I'll bring the collar tip out. Now if we go to the spec sheet and look for the measurement for the collar point length, it's calling for 2 3/4 of an inch. So I'm going to pick up the measuring tool, measure my line segment, and I'm going to make this exactly 2 3/4 of an inch, and I'm changing this at the second point diagonally. Now, just like what I did with the collar band, I'm going to go in and make these curve points, smooth out the line, and take my move point tool and true up the shape. I'll take my move parallel tool and I'm going to raise up the center about 1/8 of an inch. This will help me shape my top of the collar. So when I'm satisfied with the look, again we select our 2 center points and we set it as a half piece to mirror it, and we can view the other half to see it on the open. Now that all the pieces have been made, one of the final steps is to add the seam allowances to all my pattern pieces. So I bring all pieces down on the working area and I go to my seam menu. I can set 1/2 inch to all the pieces on the working area. Click OK, and we have a 1/2 inch seam added to all the pieces. Then I can go back in and take my seam tool and put the different amount of seams in the different areas. So at the hem we got 3/4 of an inch, and in the armhole we're going to change this to 3/8 of an inch. So we do this for each piece. Again, we change the hem on my front and back panels. And here we got to change the neck, 3/8, and also our armhole to 3/8. Now when we get to our sleeve, I'm going to change this to 3/4 of an inch. And for my sleeve hem, this is going to be 3/4 of an inch. I can engineer the corners. We pick our corners, we hit apply, and you see I'm choosing my turn back corners from the same dialog box. On the pocket piece, I need to insert notches, so I'm going to pick up the notch tool and I'm going to change my notch direction. So we want this notch to fall on the next line so we can see the placement on the cut line. So we add our notch in the corner and we choose which line we want it to lay on. Now that I've finished all my pieces, I'm going to go to the File menu and Save As. Go to my directory where I want to save it, and I will now type in the actual style number. So we type in our style number, we hit save, and you can see up at the top we have the style number and then a .tud extension. Another very important step is to go back to our piece information for each piece and make sure we put in the appropriate annotations, information for the cutter, and make sure we have the correct quantity. And we also put the define the opposite piece, because this information will carry over to marker making. So we bring down our piece and we fill out the description that will go inside the piece. Make sure our quantity is correct. Anything with quantity 2, you must have an opposite piece defined, and then marker rotation is set as 2-way. So you can see the arrow, the grain line arrow on the piece has an arrow going left and right. So all we're doing here is preparing our style to be graded and marked in the next stages. And all this information that we're filling out in each piece, this can all be generated in a Microsoft Excel report. So all your piece information, perimeter and area, the quantity, what material, if it's 1-way or 2-way, this will all be reported in the Excel report. Another nice feature of the CAD system is we can go to the View menu and open up the piece list. So we're now viewing all our pieces in a list format. And we can verify that everything's okay here. And we can even make changes. So for example, I need to assign the material code to all my pieces. So I'm going to type this material as S for self, and I'm going to apply this to all the pieces in my style. Okay, I'll close the piece list, save my file, and if we need to add anything extra, we can do it. And now we're also making the Excel report. So from the piece list, I'm going to launch my Excel. Of course, you have to have Excel installed on your computer. And here's my piece list. So you get a piece name, description, material, and an image of each piece. All in one nice report. This 40-minute workflow can be reduced by 50% or more if the pattern maker has a library of balanced and pre-fitted blocks to start from instead of a rectangle. TukaCAD comes preloaded with many of these basic blocks. For users that need to print out a hard copy, this can be done directly in the CAD system. From the File menu, we can send the file directly to a Tuka Center nearby, any FedEx Kinkos worldwide, or to the FedEx Plotting Center in Asia. When sending the file to a FedEx Kinkos, the system will automatically create a PDF file, which is an Adobe Acrobat portable document file. The system will automatically calculate your plot length, so you can figure out what your cost will be when this is sent to the nearest FedEx Kinkos. And automatically you'll be directed to TukaTech's Tuka Web website, where you can log in and upload the PDF file. And then it will be sent directly to the nearest Kinkos of your choice. If you want to view the PDF file, you can open the PDF file in the Adobe Acrobat Reader. Learning the Tuka Design software has never been easier. Built into the Help section is a video help. By opening the video help, you can go to any toolbar and any chapter and click on that tool and it will automatically play a video. To measure a segment or measure any line, pick up the measure tool and measure in a clockwise direction. The video plays automatically in the help window. And if you want to read the text help, you can take our cursor and click on any tool and it will launch our text help. This is the first time an entire CAD system has the training included inside the software. And when you need software support, Tuca Design has a built-in email integration. So from the software, the user can add as many files as they want to their email and they'll automatically be zipped and compressed. To learn more about TucaTech's rental program and other Tuca products and services, please visit us on the web at www.tucatech.com.